All right, let's dive into a really cool moment in literary history. We're talking about Samuel Johnson's defense of William Shakespeare. You know, how one guy's brilliant take back in 1765 totally changed the game for how we think about artistic genius. It's a fascinating story, so let's get right into it. So here's the big question that critics in the 18th century were wrestling with. How do you judge a genius who just breaks all the rules? I mean, everyone knew Shakespeare was a genius, right? But his plays were seen as messy, chaotic, super emotional. They basically ignored all the literary rules of the time. This set up a huge debate. Should art follow the rules, or should it be all about showing what human life is really like? And that's exactly the conflict we're going to unpack today. Okay, here's our game plan. We'll start with why Shakespeare was such a headache for critics back then. Then, we'll get into Johnson's radical defense and what his main point was. We'll see how he tore down the old rules, but also how he wasn't afraid to point out Shakespeare's flaws. And finally, we'll look at why Johnson's ideas still matter so much today.
So let's kick things off with Section 1, A Genius Who Broke Rules. The subtitle here is The Problem with Shakespeare in the 18th Century. To really get this, you gotta picture the 18th century. It was the age of neoclassicism, which means art was supposed to be neat, tidy, and logical. Everything had to follow these super strict rules based on ancient Greek and Roman stuff. And then you have Shakespeare, who just crashes the party.
And this chart really lays out the showdown perfectly. On one side, you've got the neoclassical rulebook, strict form, idealized characters who are always perfect, and a sidewall between tragedy and comedy, no mixing. But then you look at Shakespeare's style, and it's the total opposite. His plots are sprawling and kind of messy, his characters are raw and feel like real people, and he throws comedy right into the middle of his most heartbreaking tragedies. He completely ignored these things called the unities, which we'll get to in a minute, so you can see why the critics were scratching their heads even though the public absolutely loved him. Okay, on to Section 2, Johnson's radical defense, subtitled A New Way to Judge a Masterpiece. And this is where Dr. Samuel Johnson steps onto the scene. Now, Johnson wasn't just some Shakespeare fanboy. He was a really sharp, down-to-earth critic. He looked at this whole situation and thought, there's got to be a better, fairer way to judge this guy. His mission was to look at Shakespeare's work using common sense and real life as his guide, not some dusty old rulebook. So, what was Johnson actually trying to do? Well, his whole purpose was to bring a balanced and rational assessment to the table. He was fighting a war on two fronts. On one hand, he wanted to defend Shakespeare from critics who were using what he called artificial rules. But on the other hand, he also wanted to call out the superfans who thought Shakespeare could do no wrong. For Johnson, the goal was simple. Criticism had to be guided by reason and real-life experience. That's it.
And that brings us to Section 3, which is really the heart of it all. Shakespeare, poet of human nature. This is the core of Johnson's argument. He came up with this revolutionary idea that completely changed the conversation, moving it away from all that talk about rules and structure. It was a simple idea, but wow, was it powerful.
And here it is. This is the money quote. Shakespeare is, above all writers, the poet of nature, the poet that holds up to his readers a faithful mirror of manners and of life. What Johnson is saying here is just brilliant. He's arguing that Shakespeare's real genius wasn't about following rules. It was about holding up a mirror to real life. His characters weren't some idealized heroes. They were us. They were relatable people driven by the same universal feelings, love, jealousy, ambition, that we still feel today.
So why does Shakespeare endure? Why are we still talking about him hundreds of years later? Well, Johnson's answer is right here. It's because his characters are dealing with the big stuff, the permanent human emotions, love, ambition, jealousy, fear. His plays are basically a reflection of life itself. They tap into universal truths that speak to every single generation. And Johnson had a really simple but profound point. The fact that Shakespeare is still so popular is the ultimate proof of his merit. If something lasts that long, it's because it's tapped into something real and true about us.
All right, Section 4, Life, Not Rules. And the subtitle is Tearing Down Artificial Walls. This is where Johnson really goes on the offensive. He takes his big idea that real life is more important than rules and uses it to just completely tear down the arguments of the old school critics. So his first major target was this thing called the 3 unities. This was a rule that said a play had to happen in one place over 24 hours with just one plot. Kind of restrictive, right? Johnson's response was just pure common sense. He basically said, come on, everyone in the audience knows they're watching a play. Their imagination can handle it. You know, it's like watching a movie today. We don't get confused when the scene jumps from New York to Tokyo. Johnson argued for a new standard. What matters is emotional truth, not these artificial rules.
And then there was the whole issue of mixing tragedy and comedy. The critics hated it, but Johnson just pointed to real life. I mean, think about it. Life isn't all serious or all funny. It's a mix of both, right? Joy and sorrow are all tangled up together. So Johnson argued that when Shakespeare throws a bit of comedy into a tragedy, he's not weakening it. He's actually making it more realistic, more powerful, and a lot more like our actual lives.
Now for Section 5, an honest look at flaws, with the subtitle, Johnson's Balanced Critical Method. And this is what makes Johnson's whole argument so powerful and so credible. He wasn't just blindly defending his hero. He was a balanced, honest critic who was more than willing to call Shakespeare out on his weaknesses.
This little scorecard gives you a great idea of how he operated. On the praise side, he loved Shakespeare's powerful language and his incredibly complex characters. But then you look at the criticism column. Johnson thought Shakespeare used way too many puns and wordplay, that his plots could be careless with loose endings, and that sometimes he let the bad guys get away with it, which Johnson called a lack of poetic justice. The fact that he was willing to point this stuff out is what made people take his praise so seriously.
So, let's wrap this up with our final section. Number 6, Johnson's lasting impact, and paving the way for modern criticism. Because what we're talking about here is so much bigger than just one writer defending another. Johnson's work literally changed the entire field of literary criticism and set the stage for how we analyze art even today.
This timeline shows you the before and after pictures so clearly. Before Johnson, it was all about rules. Rules, rules. Form was everything. Then, boom, 1765, Johnson publishes his Preface to Shakespeare, and it's a turning point. After him, the conversation shifts. Critics start focusing on the stuff Johnson cared about: psychological depth, realism, and emotional truth. He basically taught us to judge art by how well it connects to real life, not by how well it follows a recipe.
And that really leaves us with this huge question, one that's still at the very heart of Johnson's legacy. Should art be judged by its technical perfection or by its truth to human experience? What really makes art great? Is it following all the rules perfectly, or is it capturing something real about being human? We know where Johnson stood, and that's a debate that we're still having about art to this very day.
Hey, if you found this breakdown valuable and enjoyed digging into this piece of literary history with us, we'd love it if you'd hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel. We've got a lot more deep dives like this one coming your way. Thanks so much for watching.